Nobody ever asks for the person who was told to disappear. That thought kept circling my mind as I stood in the narrow hallway behind my parents' kitchen, wearing the same faded college sweatshirt I'd pulled on that morning, listening to the sound of champagne glasses clinking and laughter rolling through the house like music from another world. My name is Sloane Everly. I was 34 years old, and on the evening of March 15th, 2025, I was hiding in my own childhood home because my mother told me the important people were arriving. Let me take you back to the beginning because this story doesn't start with that night. It starts with a lifetime of being tucked away, of being the daughter who was never quite enough to be shown off, of being loved, sure, in that quiet, conditional way that never comes with pride. My father, Gerald Everly, was a commercial real estate developer in Charlotte, North Carolina. He wasn't famous in the way you'd see someone on television, but in our city, in our circles, he was a name. He built shopping centers, mixed-use developments, office parks. He played golf with city council members and had dinner with investors who flew in from New York and Atlanta. My mother, Diane, was his perfect complement. She organized charity galas, sat on boards, and could make a room full of wealthy strangers feel like they'd known her for decades. Together, they were a power couple, at least on the outside. Then there was me, Sloane, the eldest of two daughters. I was not the one they showed off. My younger sister, Camille, was everything my parents wanted the world to see. She was 5 years younger than me, tall, elegant, spoke 3 languages, graduated top of her class from Duke, and married a man named Preston Burke III whose family had old money in Virginia. Camille was their golden child, their proof that they'd done everything right. She was invited to every dinner, every party, every client event. Her photo was on my mother's mantle in 4 different frames. Mine was in one, tucked behind a vase of dried hydrangeas. I didn't go to Duke. I went to a state school, studied social work, and spent 8 years working at a nonprofit that helped homeless families in Mecklenburg County find housing. I made $41,000 a year. I drove a 2016 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door. I wore sneakers more than heels, and I hadn't had a manicure in 3 months. By my parents' standards, I was an embarrassment. Not because I was a bad person, because I wasn't the kind of person they could brag about. This pattern being hidden, it didn't start with the party in March. It started years ago. When I was 16, my parents threw a dinner for one of my father's biggest clients. I came downstairs in a nice dress, hoping to sit at the table. My mother looked me up and down and said, "Honey, maybe just stay upstairs tonight. These people don't need to be overwhelmed with too many faces." I was 16. I went upstairs and cried into my pillow, while Camille, who was 11, was seated at the table with a ribbon in her hair. When I was 22 and had just graduated from college, my parents threw a party to celebrate Camille's acceptance into Duke. Not my graduation, her acceptance. I was told I could come, but to keep it low-key. Don't talk too much. Don't mention my degree in social work because, as my mother whispered in my ear, people will think we couldn't afford better for you. When I was 28, I got promoted to Director of Housing Services at my nonprofit. I called my mother to share the news. She said, "That's nice, Sloane. Oh, by the way, Camille just closed on a condo in Buckhead. Isn't that exciting?" That was the last time I called to share good news. So by March of 2025, I had accepted my role. I was the background daughter. The one they loved privately but hid publicly. And when my father called me 3 weeks before his big party and said, "Sloane, I'd really like you to be there," I almost said no. Almost. But something in his voice sounded different. Softer, he said, "I mean it, I want my daughter there." I thought maybe something had changed. Maybe at 63 years old, he was finally seeing things differently. I drove to their house that Saturday evening. It was one of those sprawling homes in the Myers Park neighborhood, 6 bedrooms, white columns, a circular driveway already filling with black SUVs and luxury sedans. Inside, the house was transformed. White flowers everywhere. A string quartet in the living room, catering staff moving with silent precision. This was no ordinary dinner party. This was a celebration. My father had just landed the biggest deal of his career, a $90 million mixed-use development project in the South End district. The investors were coming from New York, Dubai, and London. City officials would be there, the mayor's chief of staff, the people my parents called the Circle. I walked in through the kitchen entrance, wearing black pants and a burgundy blouse I'd bought specifically for tonight. I'd even worn heels. I'd even curled my hair. For once, I wanted to feel like I belonged at their table. My mother was standing by the kitchen island, adjusting a centerpiece. She looked up, scanned me head to toe, and her expression barely shifted. "Oh, good, you're here," she said. Then she stepped closer. "Listen, the VIP guests are arriving in 20 minutes. The Hatted family is coming, and a few others from overseas. I need you to just stay in the back for a while. Once they're settled, you can come out and say hello. But right now, the focus needs to be on your father and Camille." I opened my mouth to argue, to say something, but the words didn't come. Instead, I nodded. I always nodded. I walked down the hallway to the small sitting room near the back of the house, the room my mother used as a home office. I sat on the edge of the love seat and scrolled through my phone. I could hear the front door opening and closing. Voices, greetings, my mother's bright laugh. My father's booming welcome. Camille's voice, smooth and confident, saying, "So wonderful to finally meet you in person." I sat there for 40 minutes. Nobody came to get me. Nobody checked on me. And I was about to text my best friend, Renaa, and tell her I was leaving when I heard something that changed everything. A voice I didn't recognize. A man's voice, deep and accented, speaking clearly enough that his words carried down the hallway and found me sitting alone in that back room. "Where is she?" the voice said. "Your other daughter, where is Sloane?" And then the house went quiet. I didn't move. I sat frozen on that love seat with my phone in my hand and my heart suddenly pounding against my ribs. The silence lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it felt like a full minute. I could hear it, the absence of sound, like someone had pressed pause on the entire party. Then my mother's voice came, high and bright and slightly too fast. "Oh, Sloane, she's just freshening up. Let me go get her." Footsteps, quick, clicking heels on hardwood. Then my mother appeared in the doorway of the back room, and I will never forget the look on her face. It was panic disguised as a smile. Her eyes were wide, her jaw was tight, and her voice came out in a whisper that sounded like a hiss. "Get up, come out, now." I stood slowly. "Who is that?" I asked. "Mr. Khalil Hatted. He's the lead investor on your father's project. He's asking for you by name, Sloane, by name." She smoothed my blouse with her hands, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, and looked me over like she was inspecting merchandise. "Just be polite, be gracious. Let your father do the talking." I followed her down the hallway, my heels clicking against the floor, my mind racing with 100 questions. How did this man know my name? Why was he asking for me? I had never met any of my father's investors. I was never allowed to. The living room opened up before me, and I saw the scene clearly. About 30 people were scattered in clusters, holding glasses, wearing expensive clothes. My father was standing near the fireplace, next to a tall man in a perfectly tailored navy suit. The man appeared to be in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and dark eyes that seemed to hold a story behind them. When he saw me enter the room, his entire face shifted. His eyes went soft. His posture relaxed, and he smiled, a genuine, warm, knowing smile. "Sloane," he said, and he said my name like he already knew me. He stepped forward and extended his hand. "My name is Khalil Hatted. I have been looking forward to meeting you for quite some time." I shook his hand. My palm was sweating. "It's nice to meet you," I managed. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met before." "We haven't," he said, "but I know a great deal about you. I know about your work at Safe Haven. I know about the housing program you designed that placed 200 families in permanent homes last year. I know about the grant you wrote that brought $3 million into your organization. And I know that you are the person I came here to meet tonight." The room was so quiet I could hear the string quartet in the next room playing softly. My father was standing just behind Mr. Hatted, and his face was a color I'd never seen before. Not red, not pale. Something between the two, like his blood couldn't decide which direction to flow. My mother had positioned herself near Camille, whose perfectly composed expression had cracked just slightly, her eyes narrowing as she watched me standing in the center of attention she was used to holding. "I'm sorry," I said, still confused. "How do you know about my work?" Mr. Hatted smiled again. "Let us sit," he said. "There is much to discuss." He gestured toward the dining area, and my father immediately jumped into motion, pulling out chairs, calling for drinks, trying to regain control of the evening. But the energy in the room had shifted entirely. The other guests were watching, whispering. Camille was whispering something to Preston, her husband, who was shaking his head slightly. We sat at the long dining table, and Mr. Haddad took the seat beside me. My father sat across from us, and my mother hovered nearby, not sitting, as if she couldn't decide where she belonged. 8 months ago, Mr. Haddad began, speaking directly to me, my foundation received a proposal. It came from a woman named Renee Mitchell, who works at Safe Haven alongside you. She submitted your housing model, your program framework, and your outcomes data to our International Development Grant Program. She did this without your knowledge, I understand. My breath caught. Renee, my best friend and colleague. She'd been telling me for years that my work deserved bigger recognition. That the housing model I'd built, a system that connected homeless families with stable housing through a combination of employer partnerships, rental subsidies, and long-term case management, was something that could scale beyond Charlotte. I always told her she was being too generous, that it was just my job. I reviewed the materials personally, Mr. Haddad continued. My foundation, the Haddad Foundation for Human Development, funds housing initiatives in 12 countries. We are looking to expand our model in North America. And when I read your work, Sloan, I knew I had found the person we needed. I don't understand, I said honestly. What does this have to do with my father's project? Mr. Haddad leaned back slightly and looked at my father. Gerald, he said, perhaps you can explain. My father cleared his throat. His hand was on his water glass, and I could see his fingers trembling slightly. Mr. Haddad is the lead investor in the South End project, he said. He approached me 6 months ago about the development deal. But what I didn't know, what I didn't realize until this evening, was that his primary interest in working with me was connected to you. Mr. Haddad nodded. Let me be clear, he said, turning back to me. I invest in projects that align with my foundation's values. Your father's development includes an affordable housing component, yes, 40 units of affordable housing within the mixed-use structure. That component is what attracted me to the project in the first place. And when I learned that Gerald Everly's daughter was Sloan Everly, the woman whose housing model had crossed my desk, I saw an opportunity, a rare alignment. I sat there, processing, absorbing. The man who was funding my father's biggest deal, the man my parents had spent weeks preparing to impress, had come to this party specifically because of me. Not because of the development deal, not because of my father's reputation, because of my work. My quiet, underpaid, overlooked work that my parents had spent years dismissing. I didn't know, my father said, and his voice was small, smaller than I'd ever heard it. I didn't know about the connection. Clearly, Mr. Haddad said, and there was something in his tone, not unkind, but pointed. I noticed when I arrived that your daughter was not present. I found that unusual, given that she is the reason I am here. The silence that followed was heavy. My mother was standing behind my father's chair now, her hand on his shoulder, her nails pressing into the fabric of his suit jacket. Camille had moved closer, standing at the edge of the dining room, listening with her arms crossed. Mr. Haddad, my mother said, finding her voice, we are so proud of Sloan. She's always been passionate about her work. The lie hung in the air like smoke. Everybody at that table knew it was a lie. My father knew. Mr. Haddad somehow seemed to know too, and I knew with every fiber of my being that my mother had never once said those words to me in private. Not once. Mr. Haddad looked at me with a warmth that I hadn't expected from a stranger. Sloan, he said, I would like to offer you a partnership. My foundation would like to fund the expansion of your housing model into 5 additional cities across the Southeast. We are prepared to provide $12 million over 3 years for this initiative, and we would like you to lead it. $12 million, 5 cities, leading the expansion of my own program. The room was spinning. I couldn't feel my hands. Additionally, he said, the affordable housing component of your father's South End project, I would like you to oversee it. To design the intake system, the family support services, the community integration programs. It is, after all, your expertise. I looked at my father. He was staring at the table, his jaw working, his eyes blinking rapidly. He wouldn't look at me. He couldn't. The rest of that evening passed in a blur. After Mr. Haddad made his offer, the party shifted around me like a current changing direction. People who had been clustered around my father and Camille were suddenly approaching me, introducing themselves, shaking my hand, asking about Safe Haven, about the housing model, about the families I'd worked with. For the first time in 34 years, I was the daughter standing in the light. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me was elated, vindicated. All those years of quiet work, all those late nights writing grants and visiting shelters and sitting across from families who had nothing, it had mattered. It had been seen by someone who could amplify it. But another part of me, a deeper and more wounded part, felt something else entirely. Anger. A slow, hot anger that started in my stomach and rose through my chest like a fever. Because the only reason my parents were now looking at me with anything resembling pride was that a man with money had validated me. My own mother and father couldn't see my worth until a billionaire pointed at me and said, "That one. She's the one I came for." I stayed at the party until almost midnight. Mr. Haddad and I spoke for over an hour, sitting in the corner of the living room while his assistant, a young woman named Farah, took notes on her tablet. He told me about his foundation's work in Jordan, in Kenya, in Brazil. He told me about his own childhood, growing up in a family that dismissed his interests in philanthropy because they wanted him to focus only on making money. "I see something of myself in you," he said at one point, "the child who takes a different path and is punished for it with invisibility." I almost cried when he said that. I held it together, but barely. Before he left, Mr. Haddad shook my father's hand and said something that I know cut deeper than any criticism ever could. He said, "Gerald, you have an extraordinary daughter. I hope you know that." My father nodded and said, "I do," but his voice was hollow. Camille left shortly after with Preston. She didn't say goodbye to me. She kissed my mother on the cheek, whispered something in her ear, and walked out the front door without so much as a glance in my direction. I wasn't surprised. Camille and I had never been close, not really. She had always existed in the space my parents created for her, the pedestal, the spotlight, and there wasn't room for both of us up there. I helped the catering staff clean up. My mother said I didn't have to, but I wanted to keep my hands busy. Around midnight, when the house was mostly empty and the caterers were packing their vans, my father found me in the kitchen, loading glasses into the dishwasher. "Sloan," he said. I didn't turn around. "Yeah. I'm sorry." I placed a glass carefully in the rack, then another. "For what specifically?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. "For not seeing you, for hiding you." "You didn't just hide me tonight," I said, and my voice was steady, calm even. "You've been hiding me my whole life." "I know," his voice cracked on those two words. "I know, and I don't have an excuse." I turned around then. He was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, this tall man who had always seemed so large to me, so powerful, so certain. But he looked small now, diminished. His suit jacket was off, his sleeves were rolled up, and his eyes were red. "Dad," I said, "Mr. Haddad asked for me tonight, and you turned white. You turned white because you were embarrassed that you'd hidden me. That's not remorse for how you've treated me. That's panic at being caught." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "It's both," he said finally. "It's shame at being caught, yes. But it's also, Sloan, it's me realizing how deeply we got this wrong. Your mother and we got it so wrong." "Where is Mom?" I asked. "She went upstairs, she's upset." "Upset at being caught too." He didn't answer that. Instead, he stepped into the kitchen and pulled out a chair at the small breakfast table. He sat heavily, like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Really talk." I dried my hands on a kitchen towel and sat across from him. We sat there for almost 2 hours. It was the most honest conversation I'd ever had with my father. He told me things I'd never known. That his own father, my grandfather Harold, had been the same way with him. That Harold Everly had favored Gerald's younger brother, Richard, because Richard went to law school and Gerald went into construction and real estate. That Gerald had spent decades trying to prove himself, building his empire partly out of a need to show his father that his path was valid. And somewhere along the way, he said, he'd repeated the pattern. He'd favored the daughter who looked successful by the metrics he'd been taught to value, the prestigious degree, the polished husband, the visible achievements. And he'd overlooked the daughter whose success wasn't as easy to brag about at a dinner party. "That's not an excuse," he said. "I'm not trying to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you so you understand where it came from, and so you know that I see it now." "Seeing it now doesn't fix 34 years," I said. "No, it doesn't." We sat in silence for a while, then I asked the question that had been burning in me all evening. "Did you really not know about Mr. Haddad's connection to my work?" My father shook his head. "I swear to you, I didn't. His team reached out about the South End development last September. We went through months of negotiations. He never mentioned your name. Not once. The first time I learned he knew about you was tonight, when he walked through the door and asked where you were." "And yet you invited me tonight," I said. "You called me 3 weeks ago and said you wanted me here. Why?" He looked down at his hands. "Because part of me has been feeling something shifting. I'm 63, Sloan. I had a health scare last summer, a mild heart episode. Nothing serious, the doctor said, but it scared me. And I started thinking about what matters, about who I've been. I wanted you here tonight because I wanted to start trying, even if I didn't know how." I believed him. Not entirely, not yet, because trust isn't rebuilt in one conversation. But I believed that something in him was trying to change. Whether that was enough, I didn't know. I drove home that night to my apartment in Noda, a one-bedroom above a coffee shop, with the windows down and the March air cool against my face. My phone buzzed the whole drive home. Text from Renaa. "How was the party? Did anything happen? Call me tomorrow." I smiled. Renaa, she had done this. She had taken my work, my quiet, unglamorous, underfunded work, and she had sent it into the world without telling me. And it had found its way to someone who could see it. I pulled into my parking spot, turned off the engine, and sat in my car for a long time. I cried. Not sad tears, complicated tears. The kind that hold relief and grief and anger and gratitude all at once. I cried for the 16-year-old girl who was sent upstairs while her little sister sat at the grown-up table. I cried for the 22-year-old whose graduation was overshadowed. I cried for all the years I'd spent being invisible in my own family, and I cried because tonight, for the first time, someone with power had looked into my parents' house and said my name. The next morning was a Sunday. I woke up at 7:30 to a text from Renaa that said, "Brunch, our place. 10 a.m., you're telling me everything." Our place was a small cafe on Central Avenue called The Morning After, which served the best shrimp and grits in Charlotte and had a patio where you could sit for hours without anyone bothering you. I texted back one word, "Coming." I showered, pulled on jeans and a sweater, and drove to the cafe with my hair still damp. Renaa was already there, sitting at our usual corner table on the patio, a mimosa in front of her and an empty one waiting for me. She stood up the second she saw me, her eyes wide, her hands already gesturing. "Okay, talk. Now, what happened?" I sat down, took a sip of the mimosa, and told her everything. From my mother's whispered instructions to stay in the back, to Mr. Haddad asking for me by name, to the $12 million offer, to my late-night conversation with my father. Renaa listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her because Renaa Mitchell was not a quiet woman. She was a 5'2" powerhouse with box braids and a laugh that could fill a room. We'd been friends since our first week at Safe Haven 9 years ago, and she was the closest thing I had to a sister. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "I have a confession." "I know," I said. "You submitted my program to the Haddad Foundation." She grinned. 8 months ago, I saw the call for proposals on their website. International Development Grant for Scalable Housing Solutions. And I thought, that's Sloan's model. That's exactly what they're looking for, so I put together the application packet. Your data, your outcomes reports, your program framework. I wrote a cover letter, and I submitted it. Without telling me. Because you would have said no. She pointed her mimosa glass at me. "Don't even deny it. You would have said, 'Oh, that's too big for us. We're just a small nonprofit. They'd never pick us.' You always do that, Sloan. You shrink yourself." She was right. I would have said exactly that. "So yes," she continued, "I went behind your back. And I'd do it again. Because your work deserved to be seen by people with the resources to scale it. And now it has been." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Thank you," I said. "Seriously, you changed my life last night." "No," she said firmly. You changed your own life. Every single day for 9 years, you showed up. You built that program from scratch. You placed 200 families last year alone. I just made sure someone noticed. We sat there for 2 more hours, eating shrimp and grits, drinking mimosas, and talking about what came next. The scope of Mr. Haddad's offer was enormous. $12 million over 3 years. 5 cities, expansion of the safe haven model, and oversight of the affordable housing component of my father's South End project. I would need to hire a team, create a new organizational structure, travel, present to city councils and housing authorities in other cities. This was a completely different scale of work than anything I'd done before. Are you scared? Renaa asked. Terrified, I said. Good, that means it's big enough. On Monday morning, I went to Safe Haven's office on Wilkinson Boulevard. Our executive director, Patricia Holmes, was already waiting for me with coffee and a printed email. I got a message from the Haddad Foundation this morning, she said, grinning. Congratulations, Sloan. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Mr. Haddad's team scheduled a formal meeting for April 2nd at their offices in Washington, D.C. I would fly up, present my expansion plan, and finalize the partnership agreement. Patricia and Renaa would come with me. Safe Haven would serve as the parent organization, and I would lead a new division focused on the multi-city expansion. My salary would increase from $41,000 to $110,000, with the potential for more as the program grew. During those 2 weeks, I heard nothing from my mother. Not a single text, not a call. My father texted me twice, once to say, thinking of you, proud of you, and once to ask if I'd like to have dinner that Thursday. I said yes to the dinner. But the silence from my mother was loud. It wasn't unusual for her to go quiet when she was processing something she didn't like. Growing up, whenever I did something that didn't align with her vision, she would simply stop speaking to me until I came to her, apologized, and adjusted my behavior. It was her way of maintaining control. This time, though, I didn't go to her. I didn't call, I didn't text, I let the silence sit. Thursday came. I drove to my parents' house for dinner, expecting it to be just my father and me. Instead, when I walked through the front door, Camille was sitting in the living room. And my mother was in the kitchen, her back turned to the entryway, making no move to greet me. Sloan, Camille said, standing. She was wearing a cream cashmere sweater and tailored pants, her dark hair pinned straight, her expression unreadable. Can we talk before dinner? I set my bag down, sure. We walked to the sunroom at the back of the house, a bright room with windows on 3 sides that overlooked my mother's garden. Camille sat in one of the wicker chairs and crossed her legs. I sat across from her and waited. I need to understand something, she said. This foundation that's offering you money, are they legitimate? Because this whole thing seems very sudden and very convenient. Convenient, I repeated. You've been working at that nonprofit for 9 years making barely enough to live on, and suddenly a billionaire shows up at Dad's party and offers you $12 million. You don't think that's suspicious? I took a breath. First, the $12 million is for the program. It's not for me personally. It's a grant to expand the housing model I built. Second, it's not sudden. Renaa submitted my work 8 months ago. The foundation reviewed it, evaluated it, and selected it. That's how grants work, Camille. That's how the nonprofit world works. She pursed her lips. I just think you should be careful. This man, Mr. Haddad, he's a foreign investor. You don't know what his motivations are. I stared at her. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, that same slow burn from the night of the party. His motivations are that he runs a humanitarian foundation that funds housing initiatives around the world, and my program's outcomes impressed him. That's it. I'm just looking out for you, she said. No, I said quietly. You're not. You're uncomfortable because for the first time in our lives, someone looked past you and chose me, and you don't know what to do with that. Her eyes widened. She opened her mouth, then closed it. We sat in silence for a long moment, and then she stood, smoothed her sweater, and said, I think dinner's almost ready. She walked out of the sunroom without another word. Dinner was tense. My father tried to carry the conversation, asking about the DC meeting about my plans. My mother contributed nothing except to say, pass the bread, please, and the chicken is dry. Camille sat next to Preston, who made polite small talk about sports and weather. Nobody mentioned the party. Nobody mentioned Mr. Haddad. Nobody acknowledged the elephant in the room, which was that my entire family dynamic had shifted on its axis, and nobody knew where they stood anymore. April 2nd arrived faster than I expected. I flew to Washington, D.C. on a Tuesday morning with Patricia and Renee, and we took a car from Reagan National to the Haddad Foundation's offices in Georgetown. The building was a renovated brownstone with tall windows and a marble lobby. It was elegant but not ostentatious, which felt consistent with what I'd observed about Mr. Haddad himself. We were shown to a conference room on the third floor where Mr. Haddad was waiting with 3 members of his team. Farah, his assistant who I recognized from the party, a man named David Chen who served as the Foundation's Director of North American Programs, and a woman named Iris Wellston who handled grant compliance and financial oversight. They greeted us warmly, offered coffee and tea, and we settled around a polished table with a view of the Potomac. The meeting lasted 4 hours. I presented my expansion plan, which I'd been building and refining for the past 2 weeks with input from Patricia and Renee. The plan called for replicating the safe haven housing model in 5 cities over 3 years: Greenville, South Carolina; Raleigh, North Carolina; Atlanta, Georgia; Birmingham, Alabama; and Jacksonville, Florida. Each city would have a dedicated team of 6 staff members, a local partnership network of employers and landlords, and a target of housing 75 families per year. By year 3, the program would have placed over 1,000 families in stable housing across the Southeast. Mr. Haddad listened intently, asking questions that showed he'd already studied my work deeply. He asked about recidivism rates, about how I handled families with complex barriers like criminal records or substance use histories, about the employer partnership model, about how I measured success beyond just placing families in housing. His questions were sharp but not adversarial. He genuinely wanted to understand. At the end of my presentation, he leaned forward and said, "Sloan, I have one concern." My stomach tightened. Okay. My concern is that this plan isn't ambitious enough. I blinked. I'm sorry. He smiled. You've been working within the constraints of limited funding for so long that you've trained yourself to think small. $12 million over 3 years for 5 cities is a good start, but I'd like to discuss 7 cities. And I'd like to extend the timeline to 5 years with an initial commitment of $18 million. I looked at Patricia. She looked at Renee. Renee looked at me with an expression that said, "I told you so." "Mr. Haddad," I said, "that's incredibly generous, but I want to make sure we can deliver quality at that scale. I'd rather succeed brilliantly in 5 cities than struggle in 7. He nodded slowly. "That answer is exactly why I chose you. You care about the work, not the numbers. Here is what I propose. We begin with 5 cities as you outlined. We fund year 1 and year 2. If outcomes are strong, which I believe they will be, we expand to 7 in year 3. $22 million total over 5 years. Does that work?" $22 million. I felt lightheaded. I gripped the edge of the table under my hands where nobody could see. "Yes," I said, "that works." We spent the remaining hour discussing logistics, timelines, and the connection to my father's South End project. Mr. Haddad explained that the 40 affordable housing units in the development were an important piece of his vision for Charlotte specifically. He wanted those units to be managed under the safe haven model, with wraparound services for families, not just a roof and a key. He wanted me to design the program for those units from the ground up. "I have to ask," I said as the meeting was wrapping up. "The South End project, my father's project, how does our partnership affect his deal?" Mr. Haddad looked at me carefully. "Your involvement is not a condition of my investment in your father's project. The development deal stands on its own merits. I want to be clear about that. I do not want you to feel that you carry the weight of your father's business on your shoulders. This partnership between my foundation and Safe Haven is entirely separate from my investment in the South End project. They are connected thematically, yes, but financially and contractually, they are independent." I exhaled. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that, because the last thing I wanted was to feel like my value to my own family was suddenly tied to a billionaire's money. I didn't want my parents to start valuing me only because my connection to Mr. Haddad benefited them financially. That would be worse than being invisible. After the meeting, Mr. Haddad walked us to the lobby. Before I left, he said something that stayed with me. "Sloan, in my experience, the people who change the world are rarely the ones standing in the spotlight. They are the ones working quietly in the back rooms, solving problems that the people in the spotlight don't even know exist. You've been that person for 9 years. The only difference now is that the world will see it." The flight home was celebratory. Patricia ordered champagne on the plane. Renat took photos of us toasting. I called my father from the tarmac at Charlotte Douglas and told him the meeting went well. He said, "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." And for the first time, I let myself believe it. But when I got home that night, there was a voicemail waiting for me, from my mother. "Sloan, it's your mother. We need to talk. I've heard some things about this arrangement, and I have some concerns I need to discuss with you. Call me when you get a chance." Her voice was cool, controlled, the same tone she used when she was about to explain to me why something I'd done was wrong, why my judgment was off, why I needed her guidance. I stared at my phone for a long time, sitting on the edge of my bed in my small apartment. Then I put the phone down and didn't call her back. The next morning she texted, "Sloan, call me." I didn't respond. That afternoon, "I'm your mother, don't ignore me." I typed back, "I'm available to talk on Saturday if you'd like to meet for lunch. Let me know." That was Wednesday. I was drawing a boundary, a small one, but for me, it felt enormous. She didn't respond for 2 days. Then on Friday evening, "Fine, noon, the club." The club was the Charlotte City Club, where my parents had been members for 20 years. I arrived at noon on Saturday wearing a blue dress and low heels, feeling armored. My mother was already seated at a window table, a glass of white wine in front of her, her posture perfect, her pearl earrings catching the light. She looked up when I approached and offered a thin smile. "Sit down." I sat. My mother didn't waste time. She took a small sip of her wine, set it down precisely on the white tablecloth, and fixed me with the look I'd known my entire life. The look that said she was about to correct me. "Sloan, I need to understand what's happening," she said. "Your father tells me you're entering into a multi-million-dollar partnership with Mr. Haddad's foundation, that you'll be traveling, that your salary is tripling, and that you'll somehow be involved in the South End project." "That's correct," I said. "And you don't think this is moving too fast?" "It's been 9 years of work, Mom. The only thing that happened fast was someone finally noticing it." She pressed her lips together. "What I'm concerned about is the optics. You're a social worker, Sloan. You've never managed this kind of money. You've never worked at this level. If this falls apart, if the program fails, it won't just embarrass you. It'll embarrass your father. His name is attached to the South End project. His reputation is on the line." There it was, the real concern, not my well-being, not my readiness, my father's reputation. I let her words hang in the air for a moment, watching her face, and I realized something I'd known for years but had never fully articulated to myself. My mother didn't worry about me. She worried about how I reflected on the family. My success was only relevant if it made them look good. My failure was only a problem because it might make them look bad. "Mom," I said carefully, "I appreciate your concern, but this isn't your decision. It's not Dad's decision either. This is my work, my career, and my opportunity. The Haddad Foundation did extensive due diligence on my program before they offered this partnership. They reviewed 9 years of data. They spoke with partner organizations. They verified our outcomes. This isn't some impulse offer. It's a thoroughly evaluated investment in a proven model." "But you have no experience at this scale," she said. "And Camille had no experience being a Duke student until she got accepted. And you had no experience being on the hospital board until you were invited to join. Everyone starts somewhere new at some point. The question isn't whether I've done this exact thing before. The question is whether my skills, my knowledge, and my track record support the belief that I can do it. And they do." My mother stared at me. I don't think she'd ever heard me push back with that level of calm confidence. Usually when she challenged me, I either folded or fled. I apologized. I deferred. I shrank. Not today. "There's something else," she said after a pause. "Camille is upset." "I know. She feels like this whole situation was engineered to undermine her. That you somehow orchestrated Mr. Haddad's presence at the party to upstage your father's celebration. I nearly laughed. Mom, I didn't even know who Mr. Haddad was until he introduced himself. I was sitting in your back room. You put me there. I was hidden, remember. I didn't orchestrate anything. Renaa submitted my work to the foundation 8 months ago, and the pieces fell together on their own. Well, Camille doesn't see it that way. Then Camille needs to adjust her perspective, because nothing about this situation was designed to hurt her. This is about my work and my career. If she feels threatened by that, that's something she needs to examine within herself. My mother's jaw tightened. She took another sip of wine. You've changed, she said. No, I replied. I've just stopped pretending I'm okay with being invisible. We ate lunch mostly in silence after that. Caesar salads, grilled fish, sparkling water. The conversation shifted to surface topics, a neighbor's renovation, my aunt's birthday coming up. When the check came, my mother reached for it and said, I'll get this. I let her. It was the only thing she offered me that day. But as we stood to leave, she said one more thing. Sloan, I want you to know that I have always loved you. I know you love me, Mom, I said. But love without respect isn't enough. And love that you only express when a powerful man tells you I'm valuable isn't the kind of love I'm going to keep settling for. She looked stricken. Her face, usually so composed, flickered with something raw. Hurt, maybe, or recognition, or both. She didn't respond. She just picked up her purse, air-kissed my cheek, and walked to her car. I drove home feeling strange. Not victorious. Not sad. Just clear. Like a fog had lifted and I could see the landscape of my family for what it really was. A system built on appearances. A hierarchy determined by who made the family look best to the outside world. And I had spent 34 years at the bottom of that hierarchy, not because I was less valuable, but because my value was measured on a scale that was never designed to recognize the kind of work I did. The following weeks were consumed by the expansion launch. I worked 14-hour days, building the infrastructure for the new division at Safe Haven. I hired a program director named Malik Greer, a brilliant organizer who'd spent 10 years at Habitat for Humanity. I brought on a data analyst named Juno Park, who could build tracking systems that measured not just housing placement but long-term family stability, employment retention, and children's school attendance. Renaa took on the role of partnership coordinator, managing relationships with employers and landlords across the 5 target cities. By late April, we had our team in place. By early May, we were making site visits to Greenville and Raleigh. I was flying 2 or 3 times a week, meeting with local housing authorities, nonprofit leaders, city council members, and potential employer partners. The work was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. For the first time in my career, I had the resources to build something at the scale I'd always envisioned. The constraints were gone. The only limits now were my own capacity to lead. My father called me regularly during this period, short calls, usually on Sunday evenings. How are you? How's the work going? Anything I can help with? He was trying, and I could feel it. He didn't offer advice or try to steer me. He just asked. He listened. He said he was proud. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. My mother, on the other hand, maintained her distance. She sent exactly one text during those weeks. Hope you're taking care of yourself. I replied, I am, thank you. That was the extent of our communication. And Camille did something I didn't expect. It was a Thursday evening in late May when Camille called me. I was sitting in my apartment, eating leftover Thai food and reviewing site reports from our Greenville launch when my phone lit up with her name. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken since that tense sunroom conversation 2 months earlier, and I wasn't sure I had the energy for another round of passive-aggressive questioning. But something made me pick up. Sloan, her voice sounded different, smaller. Hey, Camille. Are you busy? Can you talk? I set down my fork. Sure, what's going on? There was a pause, a long one. Then she said, I owe you an apology. I waited. What I said at dinner that night, about Mr. Haddad's motivations, about things being suspicious, that was wrong. I was jealous and I was scared and I took it out on you. She took a breath. I've spent my whole life being the one Mom and Dad showed off. That was my identity, the golden daughter, the one who did everything right. And when Mr. Haddad walked in and asked for you, not me, I felt my whole identity crumble. Like if I wasn't the special one, then what was I? I didn't interrupt her. I let her sit with her own words. Preston noticed it. He said I'd been different since the party, more anxious, comparing myself to you constantly. Checking your LinkedIn, looking at Safe Haven's website, he finally said to me last week, Camille, you need to call your sister. Not to compete with her, to connect with her, and he was right. Camille, I said gently, I never wanted to compete with you. I know, that's what makes this worse. You never competed. You just did your work quietly, and I never even noticed how hard you were working because I was too busy enjoying being the favorite. I didn't question it. I didn't push back when Mom and Dad excluded you. I just let it happen because it benefited me. Her voice cracked. And that makes me complicit. She was crying now. Quietly, the way our mother had taught us to cry, controlled and discreet, but it was real. I want to do better, she said. I don't know how, but I want to try. Can we start over? We don't need to start over, I said. We can start from here. She exhaled shaky. Okay, from here. We talked for another hour. For the first time in our adult lives, we had a real conversation. She told me about the pressure she felt to maintain her image, the constant performance of being perfect. She told me that her marriage to Preston, while strong, had started as something her parents engineered, a connection between families that served social purposes as much as romantic ones. She told me she'd been seeing a therapist since January, trying to untangle her identity from her parents' expectations. I'm starting to realize, she said, that being the golden child isn't the gift I thought it was. It's just a different kind of cage. I understood that in a way she might not have expected, being invisible was its own cage. Being hidden, overlooked, dismissed, it shaped you just as surely as being put on a pedestal. Both of us had been warped by our parents' system. We were just warped in different directions. After that phone call, Camille and I began building something new. She texted me throughout June little things, a photo of her garden, a recipe she'd tried, a link to an article about affordable housing in Atlanta with a note that said, "Thought of you." Small gestures, but they mattered. We met for coffee twice. We talked about our childhoods, our parents, our separate experiences of growing up in the Everly household. We were discovering each other for the first time, at 34 and 29, like late-blooming siblings who'd been raised in the same house but lived in different worlds. Meanwhile, the expansion was gaining momentum. By June, we had fully launched in Greenville, with a team of 6 staff members serving families through the Safe Haven model. Raleigh was on track for a July launch. The data from Charlotte continued to be strong, with a 92% housing retention rate among families placed in the previous year. Mr. Haddad's team was pleased. David Chen called me every other week for updates, and each call ended with some version of, "Keep doing what you're doing." But in mid-June, something unexpected happened with the South End project. My father called me on a Sunday evening, which was normal, but his tone was different. Tighter. Strained. "Sloan, I need to tell you something," he said. "There's a problem with the development. The City Council is reviewing the affordable housing component. Some council members are pushing back on the number of units. They want to reduce it from 40 to 20. They're saying the neighborhood demographics don't support that many affordable units." "What does that mean for the project?" I asked. "It means if we lose those 20 units, Mr. Haddad might reconsider his investment." The affordable housing was one of his primary reasons for backing the project. If it gets cut in half, it fundamentally changes the nature of the development. I felt my stomach tight. "And what do you want from me?" "I'm not asking you to fix this," he said quickly. "I'm just telling you because it affects your work too. Those 40 units were supposed to be managed under your program. If they get cut to 20, it changes your plan for Charlotte." "Dad, have you talked to Mr. Haddad about this?" "Not yet. I'm trying to handle it through the council first. I have a meeting next week with council member tours and the planning committee, but I wanted you to know." I appreciated him telling me. It was a shift in our dynamic, him bringing me into his world, sharing information rather than shutting me out. But I also felt the weight of it. Because even though he said he wasn't asking me to fix it, the implication was there. My relationship with Mr. Haddad carried weight now. My voice might matter in this fight. I spent the next few days researching Charlotte's affordable housing policies, reviewing the South End development plans, and preparing data that demonstrated the need for those 40 units. I had the numbers. I had years of evidence showing that family homelessness in Mecklenburg County was concentrated in exactly the areas surrounding the South End development. Cutting those units wasn't just a political choice. It was a choice to leave families without options. On the following Wednesday, I called David Chen at the Haddad Foundation and told him about the council's pushback. His response was immediate. "Mr. Haddad will want to know about this. Can you prepare a brief for him? Data on the housing need in that corridor, outcomes from your program, the impact of reducing units." "I can have it to you by Friday," I said. "Do it." I worked around the clock. By Friday morning, I had a 12-page brief with data, charts, family stories anonymized for privacy, and a clear argument for maintaining all 40 affordable units. I sent it to David, who forwarded it to Mr. Haddad within the hour. Mr. Haddad called me himself on Saturday morning. It was early, barely 8 a.m., and I was still in my pajamas when my phone rang with the DC area code. "Sloan," he said, "I've read your brief. It's excellent. I want to attend the council meeting next week. I want you to present this data directly to the planning committee." "Me," I said, "not my father." "Your father can present the development's financial case, but the affordable housing argument must come from you. You are the expert. You have the credibility. And frankly, the council members need to see the human face of this data. They need to understand that these units aren't a political concession. They're the centerpiece of the project." I agreed, and then I spent the next 5 days preparing for the most important presentation of my life. The council meeting was on Thursday, June 19th. It was held at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Government Center in a long, beige room with fluorescent lighting and rows of uncomfortable chairs. My father was there in a charcoal suit, sitting at the presenter's table with his development team. Mr. Haddad was there with David Chen, seated in the front row of the gallery. And I was there, standing at the podium with my laptop and my data, facing a row of council members who would decide the fate of those 20 units. I was nervous. My hands were trembling slightly, and I could feel the flutter of my heartbeat in my throat. But when I looked at the data on my screen, at the numbers that represented real families, real children, real lives, the nervousness transformed into something else. Purpose. I spoke for 20 minutes. I presented the data on family homelessness in the South End corridor. I showed the outcomes of the Safe Haven model, the 92% housing retention rate, the 78% employment rate among housed families, the 65% of children who improved their school attendance within the first year of stable housing. I described the wraparound services that would accompany those 40 units, the case management, the employment support, the childcare connections, the community building programs. I painted a picture not of charity, but of investment. Investment in human capital, investment in neighborhood stability, investment in the kind of city Charlotte aspired to be. When I finished, the room was quiet. Council member Torres, who had led the pushback against the units, looked at me over his reading glasses. "Ms. Everly," he said, "these are impressive numbers. But my concern is the long-term cost burden on the city. Who maintains these support services after the initial funding period?" I was ready for that question. The Haddad Foundation's commitment extends 5 years. During that time, we build local funding partnerships, employer relationships, and government contracts that sustain the services beyond the initial grant. In Charlotte alone, our program has secured 3 recurring annual contracts with Mecklenburg County's Department of Social Services worth a total of $1.2 million per year. We are not asking the city to fund these services. We are bringing the funding with us and building sustainability into the model from day one. Mr. Torres made a note on his pad. Another council member, a woman named Jackson, leaned forward. "And the families in these units, what's the screening process? My constituents have concerns about safety." Again, I was ready. I explained our intake process, the comprehensive assessments, the case management that began before families moved in, the community agreements, the success-based model that supported families in maintaining their housing through employment and engagement rather than simply providing a key and walking away. The discussion went on for another 30 minutes. My father spoke about the financial structure of the development. Mr. Haddad's representative, David, spoke about the foundation's track record in other cities. And by the end of the session, the planning committee voted 6-1 to maintain all 40 affordable housing units in the South End development. My father found me afterward in the hallway. He grabbed me and hugged me, which was not something Gerald Everly did in public. Not the reserved, image-conscious man I'd known my whole life. He held me tight and said into my ear, "You were magnificent." I hugged him back, "Thank you for letting me be there." "You earned that spot," he said. "Nobody let you be anywhere, you earned it." Mr. Haddad approached us then, with David and Farah behind him. He shook my father's hand and then mine. "The council's decision was the right one," he said. "And Sloan, your presentation was the reason. You should know that I've asked David to include this approach in our advocacy framework for future projects. What you did today, combining data with humanity, that is the model." I drove home that evening feeling something I'd never felt before in relation to my family. Not invisible, not tolerated, not hidden, seen. My father had watched me stand in front of elected officials and make a case that saved his project. Not because I was his daughter, but because I was the expert. The person who had spent 9 years in the trenches building something real. That night my mother called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Sloan," she said, "your father told me about the council meeting. He said you were extraordinary." "Thank you," I said. A pause, then, "I owe you a much bigger conversation than I'm capable of having over the phone. But I want you to know that I'm starting to see how wrong I was, how wrong we were, both of us." "I appreciate you saying that," I said, and I meant it. But I also knew that words were easy. What would be hard, what would take time, was the sustained change. The daily choice to value me, not because I was useful, not because I was connected to money and power, but because I was their daughter and I deserved to be seen simply for that. "Can we have dinner?" she asked. "Just us, whenever you're ready." "Let me think about it," I said. "I'll let you know." It wasn't a yes and it wasn't a no. It was me taking my time, being careful with my own heart, choosing when and how to let people back in. That, I was learning, was what boundaries actually looked like. Not walls, not anger. Just thoughtful, deliberate choices about who gets access to your inner world and when. By August 2025, the expansion was in full motion. Greenville was thriving, with 32 families placed in stable housing in just 10 weeks. Raleigh launched in July and hit the ground running, placing 19 families in its first month. Malik was managing the on-the-ground operations brilliantly, and Juno's data systems were giving us real-time insights into what was working and what needed adjustment. For the first time in my career, I felt like I was operating at the full capacity of my abilities. No constraints, no ceiling, just the open landscape of what was possible. Mr. Haddad visited Charlotte in mid-August to tour the South End development site, which was now in the early construction phase. I met him there on a Tuesday morning, standing in what would eventually become the affordable housing wing of the building. Right now it was just steel beams and concrete, dust and potential. But as we walked through the skeletal structure, I could already see it. The lobby where families would check in for their intake appointments. The community room where children would do homework after school while their parents met with case managers. The courtyard where neighbors would gather for the monthly cookouts that were part of our community building model. "You see it, don't you?" Mr. Haddad said, watching my face as I looked around. "I see it," I confirmed. "This is what it means to build something that matters," he said. "Your father builds the structure, you fill it with life." It was a generous characterization, and I appreciated it. But I also knew that the relationship between my work and my father's work was more complicated than that simple division. My father had spent his career building things that made money. I'd spent mine building things that changed lives. For most of our lives, those two paths had seemed incompatible. Now, in this one project, they were converging, and it was changing both of us. I finally agreed to have dinner with my mother in the last week of August. We met at a restaurant in South End, coincidentally just a few blocks from the development site. It was a small Italian place, quiet on a weeknight, with dim lighting and a good wine list. I arrived first and ordered a glass of red. When my mother walked in, she looked different. Not physically, not dramatically, but something around her eyes was softer, less armored. She sat across from me and ordered wine without looking at the menu. Then she folded her hands on the table and said, "I've been seeing someone, a therapist, since April." I raised my eyebrows. Diane Everly in therapy was something I never would have predicted. "Don't look so shocked," she said with a wry smile. "Your father suggested it. After the party, after everything that happened, he said some things to me that were very hard to hear, about how we treated you, about the pattern we'd created. He said if we didn't get honest about it, we'd lose you completely. And the thought of losing you, Sloane, it scared me more than I expected." I sipped my wine and listened. "My therapist helped me see something I didn't want to see," she continued. "That I'd been projecting my own insecurities onto you. My own mother, your grandmother Ruth, she always compared me to my sister Virginia. Virginia was the smart one. I was the pretty one, and the pretty one's job was to marry well, look good, and produce children who made the family proud. I internalized that. And when you chose a path that wasn't about prestige or money or appearances, I felt threatened. Like you were rejecting everything I'd built my identity around." "I wasn't rejecting you, Mom," I said. "I was just being myself." "I know that now. I didn't know it then." She picked up her wine glass but didn't drink, just held it. "I'm not going to pretend I'm a different person overnight. I'm 61 years old. Patterns don't dissolve just because you see them, but I want you to know that I'm working on it, and I'm deeply sorry for the ways I've made you feel less than. For the ways I hid you, literally and figuratively." "That night at the party," I said, "when you told me to stay in the back, do you understand what that felt like?" She closed her eyes briefly. "I think about it every day, the look on your face when you nodded. You just accepted it, like it was normal, like you expected it. And the worst part is, it was normal for us. We'd done it so many times that you didn't even fight it anymore." "I was tired of fighting it," I said. "I'd been fighting it since I was 16. "I know." A tear slid down her cheek, and she wiped it quickly with her napkin. Diane Everly did not cry in public. This was new. "I missed so much of who you are because I was looking through the wrong lens. Your work, Sloane, the families you've helped, the program you built, it's extraordinary. Not because a billionaire said so. It was extraordinary before that night. I just couldn't see it." We ate dinner, pasta and bread and olive oil. We talked about lighter things too, her garden, a book she'd been reading, a trip she and my father were planning to Italy in October. But beneath the surface conversation, something was shifting. Tectonic plates of our relationship grinding slowly toward a new configuration. It wouldn't happen all at once. It might never be perfect, but it was moving. Before we parted in the parking lot, my mother hugged me. Not the air kiss, barely touching embrace she usually offered. A real hug. She held me and said, "I'm proud of you. I should have said it 1,000 times before now." "Thank you, Mom," I said, and I let myself feel it. Not just the words, but the intention behind them. The effort it took for a woman like my mother to crack open her armor and say something vulnerable and true. September brought more milestones. Atlanta launched on the 8th, with a strong local team and a partnership with 3 major employers, including a hospital system that committed to hiring program participants. The Charlotte South End Affordable Housing Wing reached its structural completion milestone, and I walked through the space again, this time with my full team. Renee cried when she saw the community room. "We built this," she said, her voice thick. "We actually built this." "You built this," I corrected. "You sent that application 8 months before anyone else saw it." "We built this," she repeated firmly, "together." Camille came to the South End site visit too. She'd asked to see it, and I'd invited her gladly. She walked through the space in her designer boots, asking thoughtful questions about the program design, the family intake process, the community model. At one point she said, "I want to help, I don't know how yet, but I want to be involved." "I could use someone on our advisory board," I said. "Someone who understands communications and public relations. Someone who can help tell our story to donors and community members." Her eyes lit up. "I can do that, let me do that." And so my sister, who had spent her whole life on the pedestal our parents built for her, stepped down from it and joined me on the ground. Not because she had to. Not because anyone told her to, because she wanted to be part of something real. On the first Saturday of October, my father's South End project held its official groundbreaking ceremony. It was a clear, cool morning with the kind of blue sky that makes Charlotte feel like it's showing off. A tent was set up on the construction site with chairs for 200 guests, a podium with a microphone, and a row of golden shovels lined up for the symbolic first dig. City officials were there, Mr. Haddad was there, the local news was there. And I was there, not in the back, not hidden, not tucked away in some corner. I was in the front row, seated between my father and Mr. Haddad, wearing a navy dress and the kind of confidence that only comes from knowing your worth. My father spoke first. He talked about the development, the vision, the years of planning. He thanked the investors, the city council, his team, and then he said something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. This project, he said, his voice steady but emotional, represents many things: a new chapter for South End, an investment in Charlotte's future, a commitment to mixed-income community building. But on a personal level, it represents something else for me. It represents the moment I finally understood what really matters. He paused and looked at me, right at me, in front of 200 people. My daughter Sloane has spent nearly a decade doing work that I failed to see. Work that serves the most vulnerable members of our community. Work that I, in my arrogance and my blindness, dismissed. She built a housing program that has placed hundreds of families in stable homes, and I didn't bother to pay attention until a man far wiser than me pointed out what I'd been missing. That's my shame, but it's also my wake-up call. The affordable housing component of this development, the 40 units that will serve families transitioning out of homelessness, that is the heart of this project. And my daughter is the reason it exists. Sloane, would you like to say a few words? I hadn't prepared remarks. I wasn't expecting to speak. But I stood, walked to the podium, and looked out at the crowd. I saw Mr. Haddad smiling. I saw Renee in the third row, beaming, wiping her eyes. I saw Patricia, our executive director, nodding with pride. I saw Camille, sitting next to Preston, her hand over her heart. And I saw my mother, in the second row, her face open and soft and present in a way I'd never seen before. "Thank you," I said. "I'll keep this brief because I'm not the person who usually stands at podiums." A small laugh from the crowd. 9 years ago, I took a job at Safe Haven making $34,000 a year because I believed that everyone deserves a home. Not just a roof. A home. A place where your children can grow, where you can rest without fear, where you can build a life. I've spent 9 years helping families find that, one family at a time. And now, because of partnerships like this one, because of visionaries like Mr. Haddad, and yes, because of builders like my father, we can do it at a scale I once only dreamed about. I paused, took a breath. Someone once told me that the people who change the world are rarely the ones standing in the spotlight. They're the ones working quietly in the back rooms, solving problems that the people in the spotlight don't even know exist. I've been that person for most of my career, and I was fine with that. I don't need a spotlight to know my work matters, but I'm grateful, deeply grateful, that the world is now making space for this work to grow. That's all any of us want, isn't it? Not to be famous, not to be celebrated, just to be seen, to have our contributions recognized and valued. Whether you're a social worker or a teacher or a nurse or a parent or anyone doing quiet, unglamorous, essential work, you deserve to be seen. Don't let anyone hide you. The applause surprised me. I stepped back from the podium, and my father pulled me into a hug right there on the stage in front of everyone. He was crying. Gerald Everly, the man who never showed emotion in public, was crying and holding his daughter, and I let him. After the ceremony, there was a reception under the tent. I moved through the crowd accepting congratulations, answering questions about the housing program, connecting with city officials and community leaders who wanted to learn more about Safe Haven's model. It was surreal. 6 months earlier, I had been the daughter nobody was supposed to see. Now I was the person everyone wanted to talk to. Mr. Haddad found me near the end of the reception, standing alone for a rare moment, drinking water and watching the construction site where steel beams rose against the autumn sky. "Sloane," he said, "how does it feel?" "Honestly, overwhelming." He nodded. It will be overwhelming for a while. That's normal, but you have good people around you, trust them, and trust yourself. Can I ask you something? I said. That night at my parents' party, when you walked in and asked for me, what would you have done if I hadn't been there? He smiled. I would have found you anyway. Your work was already speaking for you, whether your parents put you in the front room or the back. The work speaks, Sloane. It always speaks. Sometimes it just takes time for the right ears to hear it. That evening, I drove home to my apartment in Noda. But it wasn't the same drive I'd made 6 months earlier, crying complicated tears in my car after being hidden at my parents' party. This time, I drove with the windows down and a feeling in my chest that I can only describe as wholeness. Not perfection. My family wasn't magically healed. My mother was still working through decades of ingrained behavior. My father was still learning how to show up. Camille and I were still building a relationship we'd never really had. None of it was finished. But all of it was moving. All of it was changing. And I was no longer the daughter who nodded when she was told to disappear. I parked my car, climbed the stairs to my apartment, and sat on my couch in the quiet. My phone buzzed. A text from Renee, "You were amazing today." "I love you," a text from Camille, "So proud to be your sister." A text from my father, "Tonight was a good night. Thank you for being who you are." And a text from my mother, just 4 words, "I see you, Sloane." I held my phone against my chest and breathed. If you're watching this and you've ever been the one who was hidden, the one who was overlooked, the one whose work was dismissed because it didn't come with a fancy title or a big paycheck, I want you to hear this. Your worth is not determined by who sees you. It's determined by what you build, who you help, and the integrity you carry. But you also deserve to be seen. You deserve to be valued out loud, not just in private. And if the people in your life can't do that, it's not because you're lacking. It's because they're blind. Don't hide yourself to make other people comfortable. Stand in whatever room you're in and take up space. Because one day, someone is going to walk in and ask for you by name. And when they do, you won't be in the back. You'll be exactly where you belong. If this story resonated with you, I'd love for you to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. And if you've ever been the hidden one in your family, the overlooked child, the quiet achiever who was never celebrated, share your story in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. Your story matters too.